Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined for a rather normal episode. We're out of draft season. I'm joined by Bryan Smith. Bryan, how's it going, man?
It's going good. The nice thing about recording podcasts during the Cubs Major League games is you don't have to watch the Cubs Major League games.
Exactly. That was the whole strategy behind this. Really,
Right.
is the whole deal. I know that you've gotten. I think you tweeted out today that it's like you have people saying, "Oh, like I bet you're excited for the second half of the season when you get to see prospects play a little bit more often." It's like absolutely not. Like we're Cubs fans, Like we don't want to
Yep.
see this a crappy product on the field.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons we like to root for the prospects is that prospects allow you to buy when the times are good too. And when the Cubs get back to a point where they can spend the deadline thinking about acquiring, all-stars and they have to trade prospects, those days will stink when guys we know are traded out of the organization, but also it's for a reason that we want and will make us happy too. So bring on those times, please.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, whenever I go on a guest spot on a podcast, I always like reiterate the fact that like all of us that are writing about Cubs prospects were Cubs fans first
Yep.
because I mean like we have this like really super nerdy podcast where we're talking about Cubs prospects, but like also like we're watching the Cubs big league team almost every single night too. So it's that's top priority. But all right, man, we got a good episode going here. Like I mentioned, we're out of draft season. If you guys want some draft content, go back to our last couple episodes. Last one we went through all 20 rounds. I think we ended up going in detail about 16, 17 of the guys.
Yeah.
And so if you guys want information about any of the draft picks that came through the system recently, go check out that episode number 28. This is episode number 29. I kind of dropped off. I'm not reciting what episode number it is at the beginning of episodes, and I think that's a good thing because I'm testing my memory there. But this episode we're talking about prospects, and we're talking about Cubs prospects that we probably haven't talked a whole lot about in several weeks. The whole gist of this entire episode is to kind of look at guys that have either struggled in the first half or maybe not met our expectations necessarily, or something caught our eye in the fact that they might improve as the season wears on. So that's the entire thing. We're going to spend the entire episode. I'm going to draft 5 guys. Bryan, you're going to draft 5 guys, and we're going to hit on guys that we think will have better second half of the season than they did in the first half of the season. So I'm sure that we'll hit on a lot of different reasons why that's the case. But the thing with this is we purposefully did it so that we do not know who we are choosing. So like we didn't run these names by each other before hopping on the episode. We might get some reactions here. You might steal some of my guys here, I'm sure, because I guarantee that we have some similar names. But you want me to go ahead and start off with my first guy here?
Yeah, you go first. I'm gonna also say you guys know out there that we love a gimmicky podcast episode as much as anybody, and this is gonna qualify. This is our gimmick for the week, and hopefully it makes for good audio.
This is also like a prime example of like just kind of dreaming on some players, right? Because we're gonna talk about some guys that have had some really rough like first halves potential. I know I am
Yeah.
some rough first halves, and so like you can absolutely accuse us of being way too optimistic about players, and that's totally fine. But that's what you get when you follow prospects like this, I guess, right? All right, so I'm
Yep.
gonna actually my first draft pick. I'm gonna I think I want to start off with a guy that hasn't really had a super rough first half of the season, despite what other national publications think. I'm going to lead off here, and I'm going to draft Kevin Alcantara with my first overall pick. Um, I think
Nice.
that part of this is the narrative surrounding Kevin Alcantara, maybe less so than the numbers. Because if you look at the numbers from Kevin Alcantara so far this year, like overall, he's actually had a pretty damn good first half of the season. Up to this point, we're recording this on Monday night, the 17th. Up to this point in the season, he is batting 269 with a 323 OBP. He has a 442 slugging percentage. So that's good enough for a 115 WRC plus, which is a pretty dang good player, especially for a 20-year-old playing in high A. He's striking out about 25% of the time, walking about 7% of the time. And really, if you remove that first month of the season for Kevin Alcantara, you have a completely different player. I know that you ran the numbers as far as the first half of the season for him, the second half of the season, night and day comparison. So the fact that he has his numbers up right now where he has them is almost miraculous, you know.
No.
After that first month of the season, we saw a lot of publications, national publications, start to drop him off top 100 list. We saw Pipeline do that. We saw Baseball America do that. I know that Brett, your guy Brett Taylor at Bleacher Nation, he was driving the bus in terms of getting on Pipeline and Baseball America by saying that was a ridiculous thing to do. I
Yep.
agree. I think that dropping off lists after a rough first month of the season when you're 20 years old in high A playing in South Bend, that's a tough thing to do. So I really think the narrative is gonna change. He's gonna jump back into top 100 lists. I think that the numbers that we've seen over the course of this season is really just the start for him. I think that he's going to really take off, especially if he continues to see the entire second half of the season in South Bend. I mean, like, I think he's really grown accustomed to what he's doing there, and I think he's going to be looking really good the second half of the year.
What would be like a check mark for you that he's like decidedly better in the second half? What's like one specific, I don't know if it's a number, it's just something you want to see on video that would tell you, okay, he's sort of taking a jump.
I think that I want to keep an eye on that walk rate, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
He was walking like he was not walking at all early on in the season. I think it was like a 2.5% walk rate. It was something absurdly low. I don't know what he did last. I don't know if he drew a walk in his last game on Sunday. I was actually over in the Quad Cities this weekend, taking in the South Bend Cubs. So I got some good live looks at some guys. And but going into that game on Sunday, I think he'd drawn a walk in his 5 previous games in a row. And that's like, I want to see that. I want to see him continue to draw walks, and prove that the the approach early in the year was him just being really excited to hit, and not the fact that he doesn't have an approach, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But dude, like I said, seeing him live is just something else, dude. Like it's
It is.
he is he first of all, he's so fast. Like he is so like watching him run the bases. He scored from first on a double by somebody this weekend. And him rounding the bases, it just like he goes first to home in like 9 steps. It's
Yeah.
absurd.
Stride
And then
length is crazy.
yeah, him in center field. It's kind of funny watching him run in center field after a ball like in the gap, because he is really bent over, and like really like the strides are just absurd how much ground he covers so quickly. So yeah, I really liked what I saw from him this weekend.
Nice. All right. Well, we're going to go to my pick. The advantage, I guess, of drafting on the first Tuesday after the All-Star break is that we got a couple games to start the second half. So we can almost cheat a little bit. We already know some guys that are already off to good second half starts. And a guy that I would have targeted anyway, but I'm definitely going to draft after the best start of the season he just had this weekend is our guy Cole Franklin. Cole Franklin's first half, so up to the All-Star break last week, he had a 5.04 ERA, which was mostly just the result of allowing 13 home runs in 15 starts. On Sunday, however, Cole went 5 innings, allowed 2 hits, did not walk a batter. I got to check. Is that the first time all season he didn't walk a batter? That is correct, yeah. And it had 9 strikeouts and a season-high 17 swinging strikes. I think the big reason that I want to draft him here is that the All-Star break was also when the Southern League got rid of the new baseball that they were trying out in the first half, the pre-tacked baseball, as they've called it. They're going back to a regular baseball, and I think that's specifically going to help guys that throw changeups. Changeups are designed to kill spin. The pre-tacked baseball was designed to help with spin. So, it was almost counteracting changeup pitchers. Cole really needs that changeup. I mean, that's his best pitch by a large margin. Without it, I think he's leaning on pitches that lean a lot closer to average. So with that in tow, I think he's going to have a really good second half, and then he becomes a really tough 40-man candidate decision. You have to start to think about it could this be a guy that could fit into the rotation at some point? I think he's going to make those questions difficult for whoever is running the Cubs this offseason.
Yeah, I about drafted him first,
Yeah.
and I was internally deciding whether or not I wanted to steal your pick. I knew you were going with him first, or let you have
Yeah.
him. So you're welcome, I guess is what I'm saying. No, I with Cole, I'm curious to get your thoughts on him as a starting pitcher, because in my eyes, I view him. We've seen a lot of guys get transitioned to that bullpen role this year with Luke Little and Ryan Jensen and Daniel Palencia and multiple different guys, Porter Hodge. I'm curious about your thoughts on him staying in the rotation, because for some reason I view him a whole lot more as a starter than as a reliever. And I think part of that might be that changeup.
Yeah, the changeup's going to make it so he doesn't have platoon issues, which is a reason that you'd push a guy to the bullpen. He's also, I mean, he's just scouts are always going to have him a little higher, and they're like less likely to go to become a reliever because of his body. His body just looks like a starting pitcher's, looks like a guy who can eat a lot of innings. Also, I mean, the slider I think has been a really big step forward for him this year. It's the thing that's going to get him to 4 pitches, which is really, I think, these days what you need to be a starter. So yeah, I think it's worth continuing to explore. That timer in my head in terms of when a guy has to go to the bullpen is not even close to going off with Cole. I would need, at least another, I don't know, 10, 11 months of seeing, it not work in the rotation before I would think about it.
Yeah, he still feels really arm young to me in my eyes.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. So do you want to double back, or you want to just go back and forth, back and forth?
Yeah, let's just go back and forth. There's no real snake theory, I think, at play here.
All right. Then I'm gonna go with another pitcher, because I don't have a whole lot of pitchers on my list here. So I'm gonna go with a pitcher before you take this guy. I'll take Riley Thompson here. I think that the first half of the season for Riley saw him. He started as a starting pitcher. We kind of going into the year, we had expectations that he might go to the bullpen. And then he started as a starter, and then as a starting pitcher, he performed pretty well before being transitioned to the bullpen.
Really well.
Yeah, and then he struggled in the bullpen a little bit, and then he got moved back to the starting rotation. It's like, is he a starter? Is he a reliever? I think if we continue to see him as a starting pitcher, which we've seen, he made a start on, what would that have been, on Saturday, and he worked as a starter. He threw 5 innings, looked really, really strong. Only gave up 1 hit, and it was a home run. So that was the only run he gave up in that outing. I think that we see Riley Thompson. I really believe in the pitch mix of Riley Thompson. I think that the fastball can be good enough. And I think that the rest of the pitches that he has, I think he can mix them up well enough to be a good starting pitcher. Up to this point in the season, I think this includes his start that I have. This includes his start a couple days ago. He has a 4.97 ERA, a 1.50 WHIP. The strikeouts are they're 22% strikeout rate. So I'd like to see that bump up a little bit, but the walk rate is 15%, which is way higher than what I picture Riley Thompson having for his walk rate, if that makes sense. So he's not drawing as many swinging strikes as I'd like to see from Riley Thompson. He's one of the lower guys in the system. He's down towards that Caleb Killian range in terms of generating swings and misses. So I want to see a little bit better in terms of that, but I think that he has a really chance to break out in this second half of the year, if he sticks in that rotation.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think he was so good in the rotation early in the season that he went from a guy that wasn't necessarily on the Cubs major league radar to like jumping onto it. So the Cubs' reaction to that then became, all right, let's move him to the bullpen where he can actually help this team. And then it just fell apart. And I think everybody was surprised it fell apart so much. I don't even really have a good reason for it.
I think we talked about it a little bit on the show about that.
We did. And so it's a weird dichotomy for Riley because in a sense, being better at starting than relieving somehow I think makes it less likely for him to break through to the majors, which is a weird position to be in, even though that skill set of being a good starter is, one of the more rare ones around baseball. So it's a tricky position he's in to get through to the majors, but definitely a guy I could see having a good second half.
Yeah, I had as a starting pitcher. So I have his numbers, his opponent slash line pulled up, with him as a starter versus him as a reliever, and this even includes him working as a starter and struggling a little bit when he returned back to the rotation, after being in the bullpen for a little bit. So as a starter, hitters are slashing 213 with a 316 OBP. and a 454 slug. And then as a reliever, opponents are hitting 333 with a 500 OBP and an 800 slug. So that really brings down the season long slash line. Obviously, something else I actually did not realize this. I'm looking at the splits here. He's given up a 911 OPS against righties and only 780 against lefties, which I don't know. Do you have an explanation on that? Because I off the top of my head, I can't think of why he'd be that much reverse splits.
No, I don't really know either. That's an interesting one. He should be better against righties than that.
Yeah, but I'll draft him second. I got Riley Thompson.
Okay, I'm gonna go with a guy that with my second pick that has not struggled at all this season. A guy that has an ERA in the low threes, a pitcher that I just think is going to be one of the best Cubs players in the second half, and that's Jackson Ferris. Jackson right now 3.29 ERA, striking out 11 and a half batters per 9 innings, has barely allowed seemingly any hits, no home runs yet. So he's had an amazing start, but they've kept the leash on him so short that he hasn't really gotten to show us everything. And I think as he starts to be able to throw more pitches, as we start to let him get to 4 innings, maybe 5 innings by the end of the season, I think we're just going to see his domination go up and up. I think he's a guy that could easily finish the season as one of the top 5 prospects in the system. I think he's going to have a monster 2024 season. But honestly, like those first couple starts were so exciting, and it just got a little, I don't know, less impressive these last couple outings. And I think the pitching coaches are going to be able to just use that as such a jumping off point. And if he just throws up like a 2 ERA for 2 months somewhere in here, I won't be surprised at all. So I just want Jackson on my team just because I think huge things are coming.
How much of that is reliant on the hope that he throws more innings in a start?
It's that, but I think throwing more innings in a start is actually just going to be good for him overall. It's not so much like the numbers that I think will look better as a result of that. It's more that I think he's going to he's going to end up having better strike zone command because he's going to find it more. He's going to have more pitches to sort of find it. He's going to have less sort of a ticking time bomb, I guess, in his head, which I think can happen with guys that have real tight leashes. So yeah, I just think, man, that guy's stuff is better than the low A level. And over time, I think that just proves itself. And that's what I think is going to happen here.
I'm glad you brought that up. Any shot you think we see him up in South Bend at the tail end of this year?
I was thinking that like after his first couple outings. Now I think that less. I think they might just be okay just having him finish, go through the playoffs with Myrtle Beach, and then next year, if South Bend is a really quick stop for him and he ends up in Double-A after just 7 or 8 starts, who cares?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at. So I think it's fine if he spends the entire year in Myrtle Beach. I don't think we should look at it and say, oh, like that's not good. Because
Right.
he's still 19 years old. So yeah, just write him out in Myrtle Beach. I'm perfectly fine with that. If they have the confidence in him going up to South Bend, then
Even
awesome.
better.
I'll take that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. I'm up. I'm gonna go back to the hitting side of things. I'm deciding between 2. I don't know who you're gonna go with here. So I'm gonna ride with Kevin Made here with my pick. And honestly, this is entirely based on what I saw not entirely. This is mostly based on what I saw this weekend. I saw a guy that looked just really good hitting, and so I guess this is cheating a little bit, like you said with Cole, right? This is cheating a little bit because it's already the second half. I'm basing it off of that. But first of all, I want to point out his fielding that we already know is good in the field. He was playing shortstop this weekend. We didn't see Ed Howard play at all this weekend for South Bend, which meant Kevin Made was at shortstop, and the dude was just picking it, man. Like he looked phenomenal. He had in one inning on Saturday, he had back-to-back plays where one it was a ball that it kind of ramped off the mound on a grounder, and he went out deep, like in like the grass back behind second base, grabbed the ball, threw it on the first, great play. The very next, I don't know if it was the next pitch, it was definitely the next at bat. He ranges deep in the hole back towards third base, again in the grass, backhands the ball and fires it, shows off the cannon that we know he has, throw it into first base. So defensively, we know Kevin Made is really good. That hasn't really taken a slump. And we know that he can play a little bit of second. He can play a little bit of third. That's valuable too. So get that part of his game out of the way. The question is him at the plate, which has not been great this year. Up to this point, he's batting 227 with a 319 OBP. He's only slugging 343, which is probably the biggest concern that I have. He's got a couple bombs. He's got a 92 WRC plus. The strikeout and walk rates are pretty decent, and I think that's what we've kind of grown accustomed to the past couple of years with Kevin Made. 16% strikeout rate, 10% walk rate. So we just need to see some more power from him. Obviously, the batting average is low too, but I think that's just because he's not hitting the ball as hard as he possibly can. So I think that if we see better exit velos, the power will come, the batting average will come up too. And I think he's seeing the ball a whole lot better too, not only this past weekend, but I think the last week and a half, maybe 2 weeks or so of the first half of the season, he looked like he was just having more comfortable at bats, and that makes a difference too. So Kevin Made is my next draft pick here.
Yeah, that's a fun one because I think it's all about him hitting the ball harder, and I
Yeah.
don't know that we have a ton of evidence in like the games that that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But he's just a guy. He's stronger than he used to be. He takes batting practice where you see raw power. Like he should be able to hit the ball harder. And one of these days, I think we all believe that's going to click, and then he's just going to shoot back up rankings.
That's kind of the last step, right? I mean, like, because the strikeout and walk rates are good. Obviously, I think that if he starts hitting the ball harder, I think that's because he's attacking his pitches, and that might mean the like early in counts, and that might mean the walk rate goes down a little bit, or he's swinging through pitches just to kind of sell out for a little bit more power. So the strikeout rate might raise a little bit. But the bright side is like he can take that. Like that walk rate can drop a couple percentage points. The strikeout rate can go up a few percentage points, and he's fine. So
Yeah.
that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. But you're right. Like we got to see him hit the ball harder. But it's because it's like that's that last step is why I'm kind of expecting a better second half from him.
So when Greg made his last pick, you could almost see the wheels in his brain going. He was thinking about two players. He's thinking about two infielders, two shortstops in the Cubs system. He's like, which one do I take? Which one is Bryan going to take? He chose Kevin Made. I am going to go with the other one that he was thinking about, Christian Hernandez. And the theory behind Christian Hernandez being better in the second half is basically, well, it can't really get worse. Which, it's a bummer that he hasn't sort of lived up to the very high expectations that were set on him. At the same time, he's still a very young guy playing in a level that's very hard, particularly in a ballpark that's super hard. It has not been good this year by any means. And I think the biggest surprise is that he still just has 9 extra base hits. He had 8 extra base hits in the entire first half. Actually, no, he had 7 extra base hits in the entire first half.
He's hot.
Just an unbelievable stat for a guy who just is capable of hitting some of the longest home runs in the entire system. Just after a couple weeks where he was like pretty okay coming out of the gates, and usually that's when you see players really struggle and then they find it, like Kevin Alcantara has. Hernandez went the other way. I mean, when summer hit, he hasn't done anything for a couple weeks. But I think that's going to change. And he had 2 hits on Sunday, including a double. Not that I think that's going to tell us much about where he's at versus any other game, but he's just better than this. He's better than a 577 OPS. And I think in the long run, like working with those coaches, Buddy Bailey, I think has been really deliberate with like how he's played Christian this year when he's given him days off. Buddy sort of can feel out a season as well as any minor league manager. And I think that, the work they're doing behind the scenes is going to make for a big step forward for a guy that really could use one.
Yeah, that was my guy. You swiped him. I'm with you, man. What you said, it's that OPS. He's better than that OPS,
Yeah.
regardless of where he's playing, regardless of the level, his age compared to the level, the ballpark he's playing in. I know my bash metric, uh, obviously kind of boosts up his stats because he's all those things. He's young for his level. He's playing in a ballpark that's tough to hit in. He's playing in a league that's tough to hit in. But like he's got to be better, and I think he has it in him. So. Yeah, it's partially it's that he's got to be better than he was in the first half. It's gonna happen, you know.
Yeah, I mean they're going to play important games in the second half there, and he seems like one of those kids that can rise to big occasions too. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so if we're going from a guy in Christian Hernandez who he has to be better than he was in the first half, I'm gonna take that to the extreme. I guarantee I'm going with a guy that you were not gonna pick. I don't know, maybe you were. I'm going with Jordan Wogu. And my
Yeah,
my reason is literally it's because he has to be like he's going to be better, right?
yeah,
Jordan Wogu had put together a brutal first half of this. I mean, it was rough. He had a 160 batting average, 245 OBP. He slugged 326, and that's what he does. It's a 51 WRC plus. He went back to his strikeout ways where he's striking out 41% of his at bats. Just not good. But the reason why I put him here is partially because it can't be worse than it was in the first half, but also because we've seen the past 2 seasons with Jordan Wogu that he had rough first halves and he just turned it on in the second half of the season. Actually, last year it was more like a rough first maybe month and a half, and then he turned it on the rest of the season. But I remember back to the 2021 where like we saw him in Myrtle Beach in that first half, and we're like, like the swing doesn't translate to pro baseball. It was after he was drafted in 2020. The swing doesn't translate. Like this is just not a guy. Like he just can't get it done. And then the second half hit, and he's like he ended up the season with like one of the best offensive performances of the organization. Did the exact same thing a year ago, and so I'm expecting a better second half just for that reason. Even if he was putting up league average numbers, I would still think that he'd have a better second half just because of that reason. Um, the third reason why I think is going to be better is because of the pre-tack baseballs you talked about earlier with Cole Franklin. We know that with those pre-tacked baseballs, high fastballs were something that was killing hitters. And Jordan Wogu is one of those guys that is especially susceptible to those high fastballs based off his swing and based off just kind of how he's always been. So obviously more is going wrong than just not catching up with high fastballs, but that might help to a certain degree to see him be able to make some contact on balls high in the zone.
yeah. Just to expand on that, like his swing specifically, he starts with his hands super super low, and in general in the swing, I think he sort of dumps his barrel. Is an expression which makes it really hard to catch up to high fastballs. It's basically that you're working so hard to get your barrel sort of on plane early that you do it so too early, almost before like you've really started your swing, and so you just can't adjust up and down very well when you do that. And that's something Jordan, I think, kind of has done since he started to try to hit for more power a couple of years ago, and it's kind of a quick hack way to do it. And I know that all the failure that he's gone through this year is going to help him adjust. And obviously, if he's struggling with high fastballs, the coaches know that they're going to be working with it, and at some point, you expect that to get better.
And two, I'll say I've heard nothing but really great things about Jordan Wogu's makeup. So
Yep.
I have higher expectations. I'm more confident in him being able to kind of take all this in stride and come back strong, as opposed to a guy that we know how mental hitting is, right? How it's that's a huge part of this profession. And so I have more confidence in him bouncing back from this than certain other players. You know what I mean? I just think I
Yep.
have I have that level of confidence in him. Now, we got to keep in mind with a lot of these guys, with Wogu, with Christian Hernandez, with really any of these guys that are putting up outside the pitchers can flip it around a little bit more, but the hitters especially, you're gonna look at their slash line at the end of the year, and it still might not be pretty, right? Like we might see Christian Hernandez OPSing 650. It's like that's a success. Like that's a good season if Christian Hernandez can OPS 650.
Yeah.
If Jordan Wogu can get his batting average above 200, that's amazing. Like that's jumping 40 points in half a season. So I think that like watching the development of players, like it happens from month to month, it happens from week to week, it happens from at bat to at bat. We talked about that with this past offseason when we interviewed Jordan Wicks was talking about that pretty heavy, and then so was Cole Roeder. And we see what both those guys are doing this year, but especially Cole has been really impressive this whole season.
Awesome.
So yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely mention how good he's been. I mean, he's got a better OPS at this point than PCA Nolan Casey, which is awesome for Cole. I couldn't be happier for him. I see that sentiment all over Twitter too, with guys that are in the weeds pretty hard with prospects, people that are not as familiar but just love listening and seeing what Cole Roeder is about, because I think he's a fan favorite regardless of how he does, and I think he's really a fan favorite if he continues to put up an OPS close to 850.
Yeah, if we have any new listeners that are interested in finding out more about Cole, I would highly recommend the podcast we did with him this offseason. And it was nothing because of the work Greg or I did. It was just Cole is just an absolute magnetic guy, full of energy. And he was just, man, that was so fun, that hour with him.
It was so fun, especially because we're going on a little tangent here, but it was especially fun because with Cole, like Jimmy and I had interviewed him previously on Growing Cubs. And back then he was just kind of a ball of excitement, like just a hype man, like fun as hell, like awesome. But then the difference between interviewing him then and interviewing him this past off season, just night and day in terms of like his mentality, right? Like he's kind of locked in. Like he's still that like fun loving guy. Obviously, we still see him doing fun things on the baseball field, bat flipping, chest bumping, outfield walls, all that good stuff. But like just mentally, he is locked in. And you can tell when he has conversations with people that he's that way right now.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
You're up now, right?
Yeah, my fourth pick. I'm going to go with a guy who had a big second half last year, and I'm going to kind of bet that past is prologue a little bit. It's Jeremiah Estrada. Almost from the moment that Jeremiah started pitching this season, it was kind of clear that he just wasn't quite the same guy that finished the year last year. The fastball velocity was down probably 2 miles per hour. The slider movement was down, a couple inches. And it's amazing, how big of a difference that makes. And it really just speaks to how good hitters are at the very, very top levels of pro baseball, that, those minor drops can make all the difference. I talked to Jeremiah, when was it? I think it was towards the end of last season. And he explained to me that, one of the things that he's seen over time is he throws harder as the season goes on, because, his arm just basically gets used to throwing. He gets in those rhythms, and that's what sort of gives his arm strength. He doesn't wear down as much as sort of build up. So I think between that natural buildup that he sees and probably some urgency within himself, like, hey, I got to pick it up here. We're getting down to it, and I got to show a better version of myself for the final 2 months. Like, when that guy's pitching with real urgency and his physical tools are allowing him to do what he's capable of, then, he's still going to be capable of being the guy we thought he could be this season. It's really close. He actually looked good this weekend too. I guess that's a theme for my picks. But yeah, I really, really want it to happen for him. I think it would have huge impacts on the major league team too. And it just doesn't feel like anything is that far off. Everything just feels tweakable.
Yeah, the results he's one of those guys, the results haven't been pretty, obviously. But he hasn't looked that off.
Yeah.
He hasn't looked great. He just hasn't looked that off. It's kind of like the Riley Thompson to the bullpen thing, where we're kind of like, what happened? It's a little bit of that with Estrada, but yeah, that's a really good pick. I like that one a lot. I mean, I think that in looking at Estrada, I think that he might play a big role, especially depending on what the Cubs do with the trade deadline this year. If they end up going with kind of a soft sell, soft buy, like kind of maneuvering players, I think that bullpen is a route they could go and trade away some current big league bullpen arms. We could see Julian Merriweather potentially traded, Mark Leiter. Like we could see some of those guys traded because the Cubs have confidence in the guys in AAA. So we might see Bailey Horn, we might see Jeremiah Estrada called up and playing bigger roles in the big league bullpen. And the Cubs need Estrada to be good in order for that to happen, you know?
Yep, absolutely.
All right. This is my last pick, right? Number 5?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I'm now out on the guys that I had like on the top of my list. So I'm kind of everybody I have left is just kind of extras that I had just in case you took my guys and you took a couple of them. So here I am. I want to. This is not my pick here, but I do want to make a comment about Luis Verdugo. And I want to specifically call and he would have been my pick if I wouldn't have gone with Jordan Wogu. I feel like I can pick one of the two. I don't know. Maybe you're gonna go with them. Are you planning on going with him?
I was not going
Okay.
to, but I'm
Okay.
glad we're talking about him.
All right. So I want to toss him out there because he's another guy who's had an absolutely brutal first half of the year, and a lot like Jordan Wogu, Luis Verdugo was a guy that was kind of like on the back end of some of our prospect list, kind of in that what 30 to 40-ish range. And we were just like, we're waiting for a reason to jump both of those guys up prospect list for whatever reason. For Wogu because of the power and all that good stuff and the defense coming around. For Verdugo because he's a great defender that just look he was South Bend's most consistent hitter all year last year, really. And so we looked at Verdugo. It's like, all right, just make that jump, and it just went the polar opposite direction. So when I was over in South Bend, I was chatting with Max Toma, in Davenport watching the South Bend Cubs. I was chatting with Max Toma, and I was like, what's up? What's going on with Luis Verdugo, man? And he was like, like we were just talking about how he'd been struggling so far this year and starting in Tennessee and going back down to South Bend. And literally I was chatting with him. Literally 20 minutes later, Luis Verdugo hits a first inning grand slam. So that was fun to see. I'm hoping to look back on that grand slam in the first inning of the game on Saturday in the Quad Cities and say that was the turning point for Luis Verdugo this year. I'd love to be able to say that. So he's not my pick. I wanted to throw him out there.
I like that you're highlighting the turning point in his season being a conversation you had with Max that he wasn't involved in. You know, that's real podcaster logic right there.
It's more the grand slam, but it was also funny that me and Max were literally talking about that 20 minutes prior. Yeah. But if he turns it around, he can use me as the excuse. He can say, to you. Greg wasn't believing in me. I can take off now. So, all right, my real pick here is it wouldn't be a Cubs on Deck podcast if I didn't throw in a guy that's like a prototypical Greg Huss guy. I don't know if you know what I'm going with here. Actually, I bet you don't. Oh. I'm going with Parker Chavers. Oh. Parker Chavers is my pick because
he's been good, man. He's had a pretty decent year.
He's had a pretty decent year. The thing with Chavers this year is he's been really streaky, like super, super streaky, where he goes a week where he gets like 2 hits, and then the next week he has 3 home runs in the span of like 3 days, you know? He's been really streaky this year. And I think part of that is like he just hasn't really had consistent playing time as a professional, mostly due to injuries, not because he's not getting in the lineup, but mostly because of injuries and little tweaks here and there. He's been down in Myrtle, obviously. I would love to see him get the call up to South Bend at some point here in the second half, and kind of get out of that graveyard for hitters that is Pelicans ballpark. But I think that the more he gets playing time, the more he's penciled in right field or he's penciled in center field or wherever it might be, he'll be more comfortable and those streaks will kind of go away. And maybe he's not hitting 3 home runs over 4 days, but he's also not getting 2 hits over the course of a week, you know? And so I think if we can even out right now, I think he has a 750 OPS right around there. If we can even out and just kind of be a little bit higher than that, if he can be in South Bend, that 750 OPS turns into a 780, a 790 OPS, and that makes a big difference, obviously. But if we can see that with more consistency, I really like Parker Chavers. I've liked everything about the way he plays and his swing, and I've liked everything about him. I'm ready for the numbers to kind of showcase how highly I think of him. Every year, every update to my prospect list, I'm looking for a reason to kind of chuck him in at the back end of my prospect list. He is an older guy for his level though, so that's what always like trips me up. Like I can't really include him here because he's older for his level. But man, I dig Parker Travers. I'm excited to see what he can do in the second half.
The weird thing about his numbers are he has 9 home runs this season, which second on the Pelicans, but only 5 doubles. And that's a guy where like you write out the player that we think he can become, and it's like a 30 double guy. So
Yeah.
it's strange to me that he hasn't found more of those, especially in a pretty big outfield there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that he's a doubles guy. I don't view him as a home runs guy, but man, I just think he does a little bit of everything right. I think he's a good outfielder.
Yeah.
I think he's he's a little bit too close to that tweener stage in terms of corner outfield versus center fielder. But I think he plays a good outfield. He has a pretty decent arm. He can run the bases. He's got the power. Like I like it. He's all 5 tools. He's not a 5-tool player, but he's like
Yeah.
he's
It's 5-tool adjacent.
yeah. It's weird. Like he has all those tools. They're not plus tools on any of the categories, but it's average at everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's why I had to throw a Greg Huss type guy in here.
Well, you shouted out Luis Verdugo before you made your pick. I'm going to shout out a guy, but really I'm going to shout out my co-host Greg Huss here because we were about to get to the end of this episode, and Greg wasn't going to mention Chase Strump for the first time all season in an episode, and he kind of applies to this. So I don't know. Congrats to Greg, and good luck to Chase. I think definitely a guy that I think could improve in the second half as he gets more comfortable to AAA pitching. So yeah, I'm not picking Chase, but he does qualify here, and it just would not be our podcast if he wasn't mentioned.
It's an adjustment period for sure up in AAA. He struggled.
Yeah.
He struggled up there. He was good in AA.
Yeah.
Then he got up and it was almost an immediate struggle. So he's shown that he can adjust at each level he's been at. So
Yeah.
that'd be a good pick, even if it was your pick.
So instead, I'm going to pick one of Parker Shaver's teammates, Andy Garriola, a guy that coming out of spring training, like I had really high hopes for just based on what I'd seen in Mesa. And I think he's capable of it. I think I've still seen a lot of those same things in watching him this year. His highlight reel package would be really impressive. And if you just saw that, you'd be like, man, the Cubs got another guy here. It's just that he has not sort of had that week to week consistency at all. And really, like, he hasn't even really had a hot streak, I guess you would say. That's the one part of his season that it's sort of lacking. His numbers aren't sort of dragged up by that 15 game stretch where he, hit 6 home runs. And I think the problem with it right now for him is that he doesn't walk at all. He has 12 walks in 70 games. And that's something that, that just takes buy-in from a player with getting like pretty obvious pro instruction. I'm very sure that the Cubs coaches have talked to him and say like, hey, this is going to get a lot easier when you get deeper into at bats, when you force your way into hitters counts. And so if Andy just buys in a little bit more to just that patient approach, just a little bit longer, then I think it could take off for him. And like, the Cubs will always use with guys like this now for the next 5-10 seasons. They're going to use Matt Mervis as just an example to these guys. Like, hey, Matt was where you are now, like struggling like crazy in this stadium at this level, and look like, listen to what he says about what made him take off. It's like commitment to a plate approach. And I think, if Andy buys into that, the talent is there to, take that home run total to 20 for the season, to get those numbers up. There's no reason he shouldn't have a 700 OPS at this level. And I think he's going to get there by the end of the season.
I think with Garriola, this second half of the season could be huge in terms of where we see him start next year. Not necessarily what level, but what his role is to start next year. Because right now, like he is penciled in the lineup every single day from Myrtle Beach until the end of the season. Like that's the lineup is just not strong enough, deep enough in Myrtle for him not to be playing every day. So he's going to get those at bats. The problem is going into next year when you have the draft, the new draft picks kind of thrown into the mix. You have just some shuffling of the organization going into next year. Is he going to be a starter every single day for South Bend? Is he going to be a starter every single day for Myrtle Beach? Is he going to be a bench guy for South? Like what role is he in 2024?
Yep.
So that the second half of the year is what that's all about for Garriola. But you're right, like that approach can make a huge difference because like he does have some untapped power in there, but like I think that will come. We just got to see the walks happen, the approach and the plate discipline happen a little bit first.
Well, and these guys are watching their teammates every day, and like I would hope that everyone in that clubhouse is seeing what Rafael Morel's doing and being like, I want to do what that guy's doing, because that's a guy that has a 450 on base percentage for the last like 5-6 weeks. It's probably the most like under discussed story in this organization right now is that kid taking a massive jump here in his age 21 season. And I think if his teammates all look and say, hey, what's behind this breakout? They're going to see that, it's starting for him with the walk rate and building out from there.
Yeah. We're that's all our players that we have. We both did 5, right?
Yep.
Okay. So with you bringing up Morel, I need to do a deeper dive into these two guys. Rafael Morel and Rayvaj Garcia are two guys that are kind of in
Mm-hmm.
similar situations right now, where they're both in Myrtle Beach, and they both it feels like both of them have been in the system for 20 years, but they're both still like Morel's 21. I think Garcia is also 21.
21.
Um,
Yeah.
and it just feels like they've been around forever. And sometimes it just takes some time for them to break out. And like, is this completely legit for both these guys? I don't know quite yet. Like I said, I need to do a deeper dive into watching these guys play a little bit more consistently, but they've just popped on the map so quickly after being in the back of our minds for so long. Such a unique situation with both of those guys.
Yeah. I mean, since Ballesteros left that team, in a lot of ways, it feels like those have been the best two players in that clubhouse, and they've continued to win even as their roster's been whittled down a little bit. So, um, credit to those guys. Yeah, they have definitely been around forever. They've definitely had seasons that were sort of belly flops. So, reviving their careers a little bit here lately is pretty cool.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to plug before we wrap up the show here?
No, I mean, I guess, we're 2 weeks away here from the trade deadline, and that's gonna likely mean that I'm gonna be writing about new prospects, and those are really fun articles to write. It's something I really like writing once I get going, even if I'm a little bummed to have to be doing it in the first place. But yeah, look out for those at Bleacher Nation. And I missed a couple weeks there when I was out of the country from minor league action, so I have a lot of catching up to do. So I just want to be writing more 5 stars to sort of force myself to be watching more video to catch up with all these guys that are doing well and deserve shout outs.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that this is kind of always a weird time in the podcasting window just because you got the draft and we covered that pretty extensively. And then you have the trade deadline. We're talking about new prospects, which that's been the case the past few years, obviously. And so we're getting a little bit less of the actual players that are doing things in the system right now. And so that's why these episodes are kind of important, right? Where we kind of recap. It's kind of a recap of what happened in the first half and a preview of the second half too in the same breath. So we'll be back to you guys next week with something similar where we're covering the system and what's going on in preparation for that trade deadline. So yeah, I don't really have anything new written over at Northside Bound, but you can go check out the work that Todd's been doing, and he's been covering some prospects been drafted. Zumac's been doing his thing, so go check that out at Northside Bound. You can check out this show on any platform where you listen to podcasts. You can find us on the Northside Bound YouTube page. You can find the show on Twitter at Cubs on Deck. I made a threads from Cubs on Deck. I have threaded 0 things though, so that's good. You go check out me on Twitter at Out of the Vines, him on Twitter at Cub Prospects. And thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back in your ears in one short week.
Go Cubs.